Hi, it's Shan Wu with a Under Color of Law hot take on the way that sanctuary cities is being used in a disinformation campaign, propaganda by the incoming Trump regime. So first of all, as you know, Trump campaigned heavily on this idea of the mirage of all these illegal migrants coming who are nothing but criminals, etc. That's what he campaigned on. Now that he's going to take office, the question is, what's going to happen with that? So the people he wants to put in place to actually make happen his campaign promises of mass deportation are folks like who's going to be his main immigration person, this guy Tom Homan. So let's take a listen to Homan. Keep in mind, he has some experience at this. He actually worked as a ICE head during the Obama administration, and he's a former cop. And so let's listen to what he thinks he's going to be doing. We'll take a listen here.
So you will not only go after the illegal migrants, you may go after some mayors who aren't helping?
If they step over that line, they can sit back and watch us, which I find incredible. You don't want to take public safety threats out of your community and help us. But there are laws on the books that we will prosecute. It's 18 U.S.C. 111. Impeding a federal law enforcement officer is a felony. Title 8 United States Code 1324 III. If you knowingly conceal or harbor an illegal alien from ICE, that is a felony. When I was an agent a long time ago, I've arrested U.S. citizens for harboring an alien in their home or place of employment.
So you can see that as President Obama described him, he's a guy who's really good at deportation, right? But let's take a look at some of the misinformation or maybe genuine misunderstanding that Mr. Homan has. He's going to be head of DHS, Homeland Security. He can't prosecute anybody. Can't do squat in terms of prosecutions. Only the Department of Justice can prosecute people. So maybe his former police background is confusing him a little bit. He thinks he can arrest people and prosecute them just like he's at DOJ. He's not. He's threatening, as you heard, to say, I'm going to prosecute these mayors of cities, maybe because they're harboring illegal aliens. Maybe they are obstructing federal justice. Well, he makes it sound like these mayors or cities, sanctuary cities, which we'll talk about, are like actively hiding places. Conjures up this image of like a criminal, like a boogeyman hiding inside a dark house. It's kind of like disturbing, disgusting imagery, really. But what he fails to mention, of course, after spouting off these things like, I'm a former officer, I know we can arrest people for harboring criminals, kind of fails to mention something really important, which is sanctuary cities, which is the ones he's targeting, are already in compliance with 8 U.S. Code Section 1373. That's a huge omission on his part because he wants to talk about laws that, sure, there are laws against harboring criminals, harboring aliens. That's not what the issue is. He's still going off this kind of campaign notion of, let's campaign against the lousy liberals in these sanctuary cities, but let's explore what a sanctuary city really is, okay? Not to mention keeping in mind just who Tom Homan is, as the Bulwark points out here. So we'll put up a screenshot for you. These are mostly going to be some really helpful resources from the American Immigration Council. And let's look first at the universal definition, meaning there is no universal definition of a sanctuary city or a sanctuary policy. Despite it being used so much by the Trump regime, there's not a single clear definition of what it means. When you have a so-called sanctuary city, it can take the form of all kinds of different policies. Some of the policies might restrict the ability of state and local police to make arrests for federal immigration violations because immigration is a federal issue. It's not a state and local issues. There's also policies which say they're not going to have ICE deputize local law enforcement officers to enforce federal immigration law. Sometimes, and the most controversially, is the question of the so-called ICE detainer. So some of these cities won't necessarily honor the ICE request to hold on to a criminal defendant after the criminal hold is expired for ICE to come get them. So there are a whole bunch of different types of policies that might go on here. But the most important point to take away when you hear people in the regime trying to talk about sanctuary cities or sanctuaries for criminals, holding aside the racist assumption that any migrant, any illegal alien is a criminal, a violent criminal, putting that to one side. The important point to remember here is the idea of having any kind of a different policy with regard to federal immigration enforcement in the cities, it's actually to make the cities safer. How so? When you have folks who are so afraid of being deported or grabbed by ICE or having family members looked at for that reason, they are going to be reluctant to come forward. This is very true in a lot of immigrant communities. There's a great distrust of law enforcement. Sometimes that comes from the fact that in their home countries, it was a really bad idea to trust law enforcement. They were very oppressive, very brutal, might be corrupt. So by essentially saying there's a kind of an amnesty here, if you want to report a crime, you're having a problem, don't be deterred, don't be worried that you're going to get yourself in trouble for immigration issues or your family members in trouble. That's a really critical point because that's what encourages people to be able to help law enforcement prevent crimes. Next point, we'll put up the screenshot here about the 8 U.S.C. 1373. That statute actually is the point that the 10th Amendment really says states do their own thing and the feds can't make them do the federal work. So a number of courts had found that this section might interfere with state and local authority. And in 2017, 2018, the Justice Department entered into a whole controversial issue by sending letters to a number of cities and counties with sanctuary laws, threatening them they were going to withhold criminal justice grants, sound familiar, and requiring, DOJ was saying, we interpret this section to require that you must give us information, give ICE information about immigration status. A lot of lawsuits ensued from this, and pretty much all the courts disagreed with DOJ's interpretation. So in light of this, you can understand that Section 1373 doesn't have any effect on state laws or policies that might limit communication about criminal case information, release dates, detainers. There's no restriction on that. So you notice that Homan doesn't talk about that, right? He doesn't want to talk about the fact that most of these sanctuary cities are in perfectly legal compliance. The 10th Amendment that I mentioned there is based on the idea that the federal government cannot compel the states to take part in immigration enforcement. Look for that to be litigated a lot in the upcoming regime, because obviously people like Homan, they're blowing a lot of hot wind about how they can force the states to do this, even threatening criminal prosecution against mayors. But the Supreme Court has clarified that immigration enforcement is the sole duty of the federal government, and that state and local police only do so or help out these things if they're authorized by the federal government to help out. Authorizing them does not make it mandatory. This is not a question of the feds being able to order the states to do something. So that's something which people like Homan want to ignore here. Now, Homan's kind of embarking on a little tour right now across the country. He says he wants to meet with people in the sanctuary cities. He met with Mayor Eric Adams in New York, and let's take a listen to what Mayor Adams had to say in a press conference he held after the meeting with Homan.
And see you write different stories that distort what I've stated. So I'm not wasting my time. I'm being very clear, and I'm not going to spend hours answering your questions over and over again for you already to have your preconceived notions and your distorted views on what I have articulated. We're going to protect the rights of immigrants in the city that are hardworking, giving back to the city in a real way.
So the mayor seems a little bit defensive in the beginning of his press conference there. He seems to be working off the assumption that all his words are going to be misinterpreted. You might query, actually, I do, like why he needed to have a press conference. So, Homan came to meet him, great. He's giving a courtesy meeting to the incoming regime. What does he need to be having a press conference about afterwards? Has something changed? Well, let's listen to the end of Mayor Adams' remarks here.
We need to unravel all of these rules and procedures and laws and all of these rules and procedures. We need to unravel them and get clarity on what we could do and what we can't do. About 170 crimes currently allow us to communicate and collaborate with ICE after a conviction. We need to examine them and see what, again, my authority using executive orders to ensure that I keep New Yorkers safe. That's my only goal. I cannot make it any clearer, and so if pursuing that goal means that my years and years of advocating for immigrants that are here attempting to find the American dream, if that demonizes me, then I'm going to take it.
You can tell from watching that ending that nothing seems to have changed, right? Adams says, I'm here for the same reason I was always here, to protect New Yorkers. And he talks about this, what he describes as a very confusing bunch of federal laws. He's going to sort through them. Not really sure what's so confusing about them. I mean, maybe they're about as confusing as the ones that he's been indicted for. And why is he having the press conference? I mean, he was indicted on federal charges, and guess what? Federal charges can be dismissed by the federal government. Some food for thought. All right, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks again for all the replies and comments. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and follow me. Probably follow me on Blue Sky.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.